there's a lot of debate whether or not bilateral exercises or unilateral exercises are more beneficial for both athletes and people in the general population alike. And I believe firmly that both have value. Now, I tend to lean more towards bilateral exercises, and I use unilateral exercises as more of like an assistance type of thing. And there's several reasons for that we'll cover in a little bit. However, bilateral exercises, things like squatting, deadlifting, bench pressing, things you do when both joints are working together to push on something or pull on something. And then, of course, unilateral exercises, single leg, single arm exercises. And a lot of people argue, with good reason, that unilateral exercises are more beneficial, in particular for people with sport, because most of what we do is on one leg, running, and oftentimes jumping or landing from a jump. Perhaps you might land on one leg. And again, I think there's value to that. I think there's value to both. But I think a lot of people tend to stray away from bilateral exercises because they tend to be things that you see powerlifters do. They tend to get a bad rep for hurting people. For example, the deadlift tends to get a bad rep for hurting people's backs. And while some people it just might not be right for, my experience in this industry has taught me otherwise. I think any exercise can have a lot of value for somebody, but it ultimately comes down to context, and there's a lot of nuance to a lot of this. So today I'm going to go over the big three and why I like to use them, and some alternatives that can be used in their place that are really effective as well. So starting off things, I just want to explain, why is it that I use these? Why is it that I put such a big emphasis on it? Well, over the last decade and a half or so, there's been a lot more research that's come out on the benefits of strength training. Okay, so you might have heard that it helps to not only build muscle that we lose as we age, it also builds bone tissue. So in particular, for you ladies going through menopause, you're going to lose a lot of bone density during that time. But we all lose bone density each decade of our life. After 40 years old, we start losing bone density. We start losing muscle mass. We start gaining fat. We start losing power production, which is strength expressed quickly, explosive movements, quick movements. We lose this stuff gradually as we age. And strength training can check a lot of those boxes. It can help with so much, not just from an aesthetic standpoint, not just from a strength, like being able to pick up something heavy, but it also affects a lot of the tissues of your body, your hormones, in a really positive manner. And so bilateral exercises like the squat, bench press, the deadlift, they are the top of the top of the exercise world when it comes to building strength. And there's several reasons for that. Number one, and most obviously, they allow you to use the most weight. So more weight lifted, more strength gained, more bone tissue, more muscle tissue, more power production, and so forth. So these things allow you to build the most strength out of anything. Now, does that mean that other exercises aren't beneficial? No. You can load up a lot of other exercises and variations of these to really heavy weights as well. Okay, so, and yes, I believe there's a point of diminishing returns when it comes to this. You know, you don't have to continue building more and more strength for the rest of your life. You don't have to try to keep pushing for that, but trying to maintain as much of it as possible, I think, is tremendously beneficial. So if we get into the squat first, a lot of people consider the squat to be the king of all exercises. I've said this on my podcast. I've said this in my videos. I've said it many times, but if you're somebody new or haven't really watched a lot of my stuff, the squat, again, is widely considered by many people to be the king of all exercises, and for good reason. It has a really long range of motion, meaning the motion you go through when you do a squat it's a long distance. And that is going to hit a lot of different muscles in a lot of ways that's going to force them to grow, force the bones to grow, and increase your ability to function better. So if you're somebody that's 60, 70 plus, and you have a hard time getting out of a chair that's really low or some sort of like lazy boy where you lean way back, the squat is going to help you out tremendously with getting up out of that chair much easier. All right, and help you maintain the ability. Or hey, getting up off the toilet. Okay, that's something, I see a lot of people with their toilets maybe elevated or something like that, but this will keep you from having to have something like that and keep you from getting stuck in your chair or stuck on the ground. So the squat, you're able to use a lot of weight. Now, the next thing is beyond them being beyond these allowing you to lift the most weight, they also, like I said with the squat, long range of motion. Long range of motion is good because we want to be as strong as possible in as many different positions as possible. Okay, so squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, and other things like that have really long ranges of motion. Okay, and then finally, these exercises allow you to use a lot of different muscles all at the same time. So for the squat, using that again as an example, you're going to use all the muscles of the lower body, yes, but then you're also going to use a lot of other muscles of the trunk, the core muscles, the muscles of the back, all have to work really hard to maintain your posture and keep yourself from being essentially trapped under the bar when you do it, or keeping your back from rounding and moving in ways that we don't want to, making the movement more efficient and safe for you. So those are the big reasons that I use these exercises. And they're really functional exercises. We squat all the time. We deadlift. We pick things up off the ground all the time. We push things all the time. So these are really functional. Some people might, say that the bench press isn't as functional. The overhead press would be a better version. And hey, I agree. And I think, maybe this could be turned into the big four, because the overhead press is a tremendous exercise. Before the bench press even existed, all you had was the overhead press. And it was considered baseline for people to be able to overhead press their body weight. Pressing your body weight over your head. Imagine that. That used to be no big deal. Nowadays, getting a body weight overhead press is a pretty big deal, pretty big feat of strength. But I digress. So with the squat, getting back to it, uses a lot of different muscles. Long range of motion. Okay? You're able to load up a lot of weight. The only other thing that you could load more weight on is the deadlift. Okay? If we're talking specifically about your free weight exercises. And you have all sorts of different variations. These are just a handful. Okay, this is not an exhaustive list to say the least. You have the back squat where you're holding the bar on your back. The front squat where it's being held on the shoulders. Really tough one, but if you can't do back squats, front squats are a good alternative. If you have access to a safety bar, which is like your standard bar, but it has two handles that come out in the front, so you don't have to reach back if it bothers your shoulder. Safety bar squats, good alternative. Goblet squats, okay, holding a dumbbell in front of you. Body weight squats and assisted squats. So these are all different levels or different variations of the squat. Some people are going to need to start off with just a body weight squat or even less than body weight, using band tension to assist you up. I have had a good amount of success with that with people in the past, being able to build up to eventually doing a body weight and then loading it with a goblet squat or a bar. All right, so all of these are great options. Now, the bar versions are going to allow you to build the most strength, but for somebody that has a hard time squatting just their body weight, just starting with that and then maybe adding a dumbbell to it is going to be a major benefit to those individuals. So use any one of these different versions. And again, there are others, but these are some of my favorites, and from what I've experienced, some of the most beneficial. The bench press next. So we're hitting the upper body. So what I like so much about the bench press is the fact that you can load a lot of weight on it. So yes, you're laying on a bench. It's not something that you're going to necessarily do very often, if at all, in your life, lay on your back and push on something. But again, you're able to load that weight up, the range of motion's long, and you're using a lot of muscles all at the same time. This makes it more functional. All right. My example that I always like to use is leg extensions versus squats. Never do you ever sit on some chair or something and just extend your legs out in front of you. It just doesn't happen. And you're only isolating the quadricep muscles. Whereas with the squat, you're doing a whole, just your entire body is engaged. So the bench press, different variations of that, barbell bench press, of course, dumbbell chest press, and push-up variations can be another good alternative if doing something where you're pushing on a bar or dumbbells tends to bother your shoulders. You can also do push-ups, which tend to be a bit easier on the shoulders. You may even need to use assistance with your push-ups, as many people struggle with those. So again, using bands to assist in your push-ups or doing push-ups elevated with your hands on a countertop or a table or something like that. And then finally, the deadlift. So deadlift, again, you can use the most weight with this, and people can use relatively heavy weights pretty early on with the deadlift. So it makes it fun, makes it a lot of people's favorite lift, especially out of the gate. You get the barbell deadlift, the kettlebell deadlift, the Romanian deadlift. So that can be done with a bar or dumbbells. That one starts at the top and you go from the top down, which can be helpful for people that really have a hard time setting their back in a neutral position at the bottom of a deadlift. Instead, you start off standing and you can more easily maintain a more neutral spine going from the top down. So that's a good variation for anybody that struggles with that. And then the sumo deadlift. So this is one that I don't really coach very much. I tend to go with a conventional stance. So sumo, your legs, your feet are outside your hands. And then with conventional, you have a more narrow stance and your hands are outside your legs. That is more based on preference and leverages. So that's going to be something you'll have to figure out on your own. But both can enable you to lift a good amount of weight and build a lot of strength as well. So the big three, really beneficial. But I still use unilateral exercises as well. Things like lunges and single leg RDLs, split squats, single arm overhead presses and chest presses. I think they all can be valuable. And again, in the proper context, I've had a couple of people in my career where deadlifting just doesn't really work for them. So we do different variations. I've had times where a barbell bench press just does not work because somebody had a rotator cuff surgery or they had their biceps tendon reattached, what have you. And we have to do things like push-ups instead. So there are those individuals that are outliers, but I think for the mass majority of people, these are very beneficial exercises, especially given building strength and longevity. So use them, learn to get comfortable with them, but also use unilateral exercises, target your core, target smaller muscle groups that are lagging behind perhaps, but don't shy away from these just because somebody told you that low squats hurt your knees, or the bench press is bad for your shoulders, or the deadlift is bad for your back, because it's not necessarily. It might be bad for a certain individual's back perhaps, but it's not going to be bad just for anybody. So take your time. Start light with these things. Really learn the technique. These are very technical lifts. They require a lot of focus, some attention to detail, because if you're not, then yes, of course, you might get hurt. So I would hire a coach at least for a few sessions or more to learn how to do these things properly and get the most out of them. You don't have to be somebody that's looking to break records or compete to hire a coach and do these. These can be beneficial for anybody and everybody. So I hope that helped clear a few things up for you. Again, you don't have to do these things, but I really think it would be in your best interest to do them, no matter who you are. So give them a shot, take your time, build them up slowly, get a solid foundation of technique, and you'll be able to benefit from these for decades.